bring to you today some content around bringing brand control into AI search. And I'm super excited to be joined by Kevin. We're going to go through introductions. We're going to have a ton of fun, and we are going to leave time for questions. So feel free to put your questions in the chat. Our team is there ready to answer your questions. But let's start by just like introducing where you're from. Tell us sort of what city, state you're joining us from. We want to hear it and welcome you to the conversation. Looks like we have some locals here, joining me here in Guelph, also from across, Madrid, amazing. Toronto, love it. Bunch of Canadians, love this. Texas, excellent. Welcome, Alejandra. We have someone from England, New York City. Awesome. So let's go ahead and jump in. And we're going to start with introductions. And if you've seen some of our webinars before, you know we like to introduce ourselves with our knowledge graph. So who we are and how we're connected to other things in the world. So you can see from my knowledge graph, I have a technical background. I attended MIT and have a degree in engineering. I am Canadian. I'm the CEO and co-founder. My name is Martha Van Berkel. But I grew up in enterprise and I spent actually 14 years at Cisco where I really learned about the challenges of getting things done, of being innovative, of trying to stay ahead of the curve. And I think like there's no time like now with AI where that is so important in the enterprise environment. I do know a thing or two about schema markup. And a fun fact about me is I used to drive a 1965 Austin Healey Sprite. It's a picture of my car. And my actual car was in the movie called Losing Chase that Kevin Bacon directed. And so Kevin Bacon actually used to drive my car. And I love this because hopefully you know about the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon game. And you now know that you can win because you are connected to me. And I love this because you figuring out you can win the game is inferencing, which is like figuring out from connections and data sort of how to answer a question. And this is exactly what AI and search is doing sort of when they understand your schema markup. Now, before I hand it over to Kevin, you're joining one of Schema App's webinars. And so I want to just tell you a little bit about who we are. So we basically help brands control their narrative in AI. And we do that by providing the technology and the amazing service team that helps you build a structured data layer that ensures your brand's truth is represented accurately in AI. And we have the absolute pleasure of working with amazing enterprise customers around the world, actually. And then we're also really proud that we're SOC 2 compliant. It's something that we work towards, again, sort of making sure that we're showing up and doing what needs to get done for our enterprise clients. All right, with no further ado, let me hand it over to my colleague, Kevin, who's going to go ahead and introduce himself.
Amazing. Martha, I'm so excited to be here. Really looking forward to this conversation. And to introduce myself, obviously you can see my name here is Kevin. I am a customer insights manager here at Schema. Given the volume of enterprise customers that I work with, given my time here at Schema, you can see that I've come to learn a thing or two about SEO. I am Canadian by nationality, and I have a background in SaaS technologies, having worked with a previous sensory science testing software company. So it's given me some insights onto testing and sort of like results oriented reviews. And from here, I also have a background in marketing. So you can see that I've graduated from Toronto Metropolitan University. This university went through a name change pretty recently. And so we have a variety of same as values within here just to help bring clarity as to what this is. So anytime I'm mentioning it, we're really disambiguating what is being defined here. So Martha, again, really looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you so much.
Well, we've lined up a fun agenda. So we're going to talk about like schema markup, like in the world of AI, sort of what's going on, what's new. We were joking, sort of like every week is like a new year in AI. We're then going to talk about like what is AI ready schema markup, right? So if you're already doing schema markup today, how do you know that it's actually ready and really going to perform in this new world? We're then going to talk about value, right? Like actual real measurements and outcomes that we're seeing across our enterprise clients and across our portfolio. And then finally, like how can we help you prepare for AI? And we've got some really cool stuff around entity SEO, server side, you name it. We're going to cover a couple really key topics. Again, we want this to be interactive. So ask your questions and we'll make sure that we get to those throughout today's conversation. So, with no further ado, Kevin, why don't you kind of start telling us a little bit about the landscape of the world today?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. Like every week, there seems to be something new, especially over this past year, past 6 months, even. There's so many disruptions happening from Google and other large language models. And one of the things that, like, we have from information from Conductor here is that in 2025, we were seeing 1 in 5 search queries showing up as an AIO result. One of the things I find most interesting here is how healthcare and financials are being affected. They're appearing more frequently than most other industries. And the takeaway is that like consumers are seeing your brand on AI overviews, and there's a critical need to optimize for it. So you want visibility, you want citations, but you also want trust. So again, it's a critical need to be optimizing for where your users are finding you. And good news, Google has already given us a bit of a framework. They say structured data is critical to AI search. They've repeated this in talks, in documentation. But one of the things that I think is really interesting here is back in October 2025 at Google Search Central Dubai, they said structured data is efficient. And what does that mean? Well, it means that it makes it easier and more cost effective for them to understand content on page. And so why does that matter? Well, if Google's finding it an efficient way, I anticipate other models will be following that same format. And thankfully, Microsoft is echoing the same thing. They're the big players in this space, so obviously they found a way of utilizing schema markup to kind of create these like really helpful, efficient ways of understanding content. So Microsoft, who has been a bit more transparent with documentation, they again themselves are saying directly use schema markup to find success in AI search.
Kevin, I often think about like the two companies who've scaled understanding the web, right?
Yeah.
Are Microsoft and Google. And so I love your call out that like, the big dog, the ones who've done this before at the level of scale that
Hmm.
OpenAI and some of the others have never had to deal with, they're saying use structured data, which I think is, partly again, follow the money, right? It's likely sort
Yeah.
of why that is. Tell us a little bit more about like when we say structured data, like what do we mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah, so when we're looking at a page as humans, we're so privileged because we get to see what's on page. We have these like beautiful designs that like really clearly help us understand what the page is describing. So on the left, as a human, we're seeing that this physician page obviously has a name, they have a rating, they practice out of a particular location. But we have to remember that when a crawler or a bot is looking at the information, they're just looking at it as an HTML format. And so what we want to do is bring real clarity in this machine readable like code, schema markup, to help bring clarity about what these things are. This page is clearly defining a physician. They clearly have a description, a name, they have an address that they're practicing out of, and medical specialties. So we're trying to bring that clarity to those search engines, to those bots, to help them understand what's being defined on page here.
it's really like that control aspect, right? Like you can kind of
Exactly.
we want to control how the brand shows up, right, to our consumers. Like why wouldn't we want to do the same in the data, right? So it's this,
Yes.
brand control is brand data layer that allows you to
Mhm.
kind of control it. Why I think this is even more important now than ever. And this is really shifting from us thinking of schema markup as only, I'll say an SEO tactic or strategy to really being infrastructure. And
Mhm.
when Kevin Scott from Microsoft, he's the CTO of Microsoft, talked about the agentic web, right, which is happening now, right? We're going to talk about sort of like how we're seeing that happen now. He's actually talking about the open agentic web, and Microsoft is using the schema markup, the structured data to inform that endpoint, right, to make your website ready. And I think again, a lot of this is, it then becomes truly, the way that you're inserting and making sure your brand's data is both accessible to agents, right, and accurately understood. So this is, I think, the agentic web is going to really change how marketers, how digital marketers, how we actually foresee, the role of schema markup. It's changed, just in
Mhm.
this last sort of 6 to 12 months. And the agentic web is happening now, like whether that be announcements. We've seen announcements from lots of different places, right? We've seen them from Google, we've seen them from OpenAI, new partners emerging, whether that be Shopify, Google and Etsy kind of coming up. But the idea here is to bring ease to the consumer journey, right? I don't know about you, but Kevin, but like I don't love shopping. So the idea that Google is motivated to make like research or when something goes on sale, I never buy anything on sale because I'm not like that patient, right? I'm just going to buy it,
Mhm.
never going to go shopping again. I don't want to go to the mall again. So I love that like even though this agentic change is also changing, how we prepare and where we prepare our data, it's also going to have a huge impact on the consumer journey and sort of the ease at which we get to interact with your brand or sort of with organizations. All
Mhm.
right. So as we've kind of laid out sort of what's happening in the world when it comes to schema markup, um, let's do a quick poll. How many people today have schema markup on their website? We have about 50 people joining us at this time. So go ahead and fill that out. Now, while you're doing that, I thought I'd share with you sort of like why or what are the areas that like I see sort of, schema markup and specifically schema app helping control your brand narrative in AI. And the first starts with that brand authority and control, right? How do we make sure your brand is understood in the way that you want it to be done? How do we bring clarity, right? Or reduce ambiguity? I also like to think of this as like reducing risk, right? We're looking at, AIOs, some of the biggest where areas that that's showing up, healthcare and finance. Well, it's pretty risky if those answers are wrong. And so mitigating
Mhm.
AI hallucinations, reducing the risk of how the brand's showing up is one kind of key area that Schema app helps in. The second is what, we've been doing for a long time, right? Demand and visibility, right? How do we still drive eyes, right, to see the brand, whether that be in a SERP, whether that be in a chat, whether that be in our research. Also, that then means like increasing conversions, click-through rate, and driving both branded and non-branded, traffic to your site. So we still need to get that conversion, even though I think that's really going to change, right, over time, depending on sort of how people are doing discovery. And finally, AI and agent readiness. This is probably one of my favorites because, I think it's sort of like a whole new area in which, as historically SEOs or digital marketers, we're now sort of thinking about how do we make sure we're controlling that brand narrative, right? That, we're actually like grounding our truth for our brand, in all these different areas that people are doing discovery. And these are the areas that we're sort of marching towards a schema app to ensure our customers are not just ready, but winning. All right, we've got our poll results back. Looks like we've got, a ton of schema markup people on the phone. Absolutely love this. So, 88% of you are doing some schema markup today. Well, this is a perfect setup because what we're going to actually jump into next is like, what does AI ready schema markup look like? So let's jump in. I'm going to hand it over back to Kevin. Kevin, walk us through what does like, our crawl, walk, run look like in sort of AI
Yeah.
ready schema markup?
Yeah, I'm so excited to see how many of our attendees actually have schema markup in place. One of the things to call out is the Web Almanac from this most recent release had websites at about 50%. So good news for those of you who do have it on your site. You're well already starting in advance of the majority of websites. But we know that markup isn't all created equally. So there might be some different levels of quality that we'd be looking at. We'll start with beginner because I think that's helpful where we're often looking towards a lot of plugins that might provide markup, but when they're doing so, it's really only like generic schema types. They might just be typing something as a web page really broadly without a lot of properties. And in fact, in my experience, we're sometimes seeing like repeated properties or misnamed properties, things that are being mismatched. And so this is a view wherein even if you have markup, it's worthwhile reviewing what that markup looks like to ensure it is going to be actually healthy. From a connectedness perspective, there's like no connections from the markup itself. There's no relationships that are defined through the vocabulary. And in terms of coverage across the site, it's really only implemented on a few key pages, maybe like a home page, maybe a contact page, but not too widely. And then in terms of like entity maturity, which we can talk about, but there's no like entity linking or reusable identifiers, which is what is foundational for creating what we would talk about as a null graph.
So Kevin,
From yeah,
based on that, like that means like none of the dots would be connected like in our
right,
info slides,
right.
right? Like there's sort of like sporadic dots. So like you know that
Yeah.
I drove a car, but you might not know my Kevin Bacon connection, or you might know that like I
Mhm.
might be Canadian, right? So it's sort of like this
Yeah,
disparate story, which is interesting from a brand perspective, right? Because it would be like a disconnected message.
right. So imagine, Martha, you were described on a page from Schema, but we didn't have the relationship that you're actually the founder of it, right?
Yeah,
Where we have these like unconnected entities being defined without a relationship being defined within them.
cool. All right, let's
From
go to
an
intermediate.
inter Amazing. From an intermediate perspective, I would target this as largely being like rich results oriented. So you're going to be seeing the appropriate core schema types used on key pages. So let's say you have a product, you might apply product markup. And a lot of those properties that you're targeting is going to be sort of what's minimally viable in order to achieve a rich result. So you'll have the relevant properties targeted, but maybe not like complete coverage. You might be missing key information like SKUs, GTINs, whatever it might be. But again, you might have eligibility for the rich result. There might be some level of connectedness wherein there's some entities on page that are connected to a central organization. So taking that product example, you might have an organization as a seller. Again, when we're talking about coverage, this is going to be implemented on those strategic or converting pages. PDPs or product detail pages are going to be a key example here. But when we're talking about this like entity maturity and again, this connectedness, they might be saying an organization is the seller of a product, but it might be inconsistently defined. It might not be always referencing the same thing. And so page by page, you have this sort of separate definition of your organization. This is what leads us into advanced markup, where we're looking at across the site, you have precise, semantically accurate schema types aligned with the page intent. So if we're talking about financials, you might have a financial product, but is it a bank account? Is it an investment or deposit? Let's be precise about what's being defined here, because we start talking about this in terms of infrastructure. And when doing so, we want to make sure that we have a comprehensive view of those schema properties that can be defined to help bring clarity about what this page is describing. When we have connectedness, we're looking towards external sources like Wikipedia, like Wikidata, like Google's own knowledge graph to bring clarity about what's being described. You saw me mention my university. There was a name change. I want to be clear about what that place is so that the search engines and machines have a clear understanding. In terms of coverage, we're applying this broadly across the site, again, with these precise, semantically accurate schema types. And then in terms of entity maturity, one of the pieces that really help us create this knowledge graph is that we're actually reusing our identifiers or our resources that we've predefined, like an organization, and we're consistently referencing the same thing so that we don't have these pages that are independently defining it, but you're always referencing the exact same thing.
It's interesting when you talk through this, we almost can like think about the evolution of schema markup over the last decade,
Yeah.
right? Which is how long we've been doing this, right? The beginner was like, let's just try to optimize a page or two. It's complicated, like it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
The middle is like, let's get visibility on the things that Google is going to reward us
Yeah.
for. So rich results, whether that be star ratings, FAQs, et cetera. But now again, this advanced is like really about that clarity, understanding, owning authority for the things that you
Yes.
understand. And it's so interesting because, like, this is what AI has unlocked, right? Like this is what AI has sort of required.
Mm-hmm.
And as a, as an enterprise or as, as an organization, it's a control piece. And I love that because you're being like very prescriptive, right? With
Yeah.
regards to how things done. So Kevin, I love like you have a checklist, like walk us through sort
Yep.
of like, we're going to go, for those of you on the call, you might go back and say, hey, let's go check out doing this. I see actually we have a lot of our customers on here. So good news, like we got this covered for you. But walk us
Mm-hmm.
through the list.
Yeah, and I think it's really helpful for any of our attendees to take this as a resource. But when we're looking at this checklist, it really comes down to these like key steps where you're defining the thing that you're describing on page. This is where I find it get to be a little philosophical, a little bit fun, but you're trying to define what is described on page. You're wanting to use a high depth of properties to ensure that those things are well understood, and breadth of markup. So you're applying it across all your key pages. This is again about that brand authority, that brand narrative. So you're defining and describing those things that you are yourself an expert in. You're wanting to identify all those different things that you're defining through these ad ID values. So you're distinguishing these entities and making them referenceable across your site and beyond. And then from a connected perspective, you're then leaning on some of those external resources like Google's Knowledge Graph, Wikipedia, Wikidata to help bring added clarity about what's being defined. So in terms of defining, again, each page will have perhaps a different intent. So we have our highlighter page here. It is a software application. So we have defined it appropriately. We've defined it as a software application. So this would be the practice you want to take on a page by page or a page set by page set basis.
Oh, I'm clicking. I'm trying to answer a question while also being your Vanna. Go for it.
No worries. Thank you so much, Martha. And as well, one of the things that I find really fun about the schema.org vocabulary is that it also doubles up as like a content recommendations guide. So if you don't have content for the thing that you're intending to describe, then you can look at the vocabulary and start looking at those different properties that the machines are expecting you to be mentioning or describing itself. But then again, we want to make sure that we are leveraging these properties to bring clarity, because this is, again, what the machines are looking towards to understand what's being described.
Kevin, these are also like where you're defining the relationships between things, right? So,
Yes,
like the
yes.
properties, not even just describing it, but describing the relationship. Like, I'm not a
Yeah.
professor at MIT, right? I was an alumni of MIT. So, I think this
Hmm.
is again where context matters in this age of
Yes.
AI. And these properties, even though like people are like, oh, I just have to like, categorize this, you're actually defining that relationship to help the inferencing,
Mhm.
right? That's the key thing that's different now based on how these machines understand. All right, back to you.
Amazing. And then in terms of like depth, again, what we're looking to do is really help define what's described on page, as mentioned. So we have this software application, but we have a variety of content that can support what this is. We have it being named, we have a description, we actually even have a review of it. We have supporting FAQ content and a supporting video. But again, as Martha, you described, we're starting to look at the relationships. So how does this software application actually relate to Schema? Well, Schema as an organization is the creator of this software application. So we want to make those relationships really clear and can do so with the schema markup. And in terms of breadth, again, we want to make sure that we're like controlling that narrative, controlling the like brand authority so that you're applying the markup across all your key pages. So of course, software application for our highlighter, we want to make sure we're defining that correctly. But there's all sorts of other pages that we have. We have Martha's author page where we can apply profile page. We have our home page where we can describe our organization. So we're applying the schema markup with the correct semantic like schema typing across all of our key pages. And then this is where I think it starts to get really fun, because we have these like identifiers for each of these different pages. So again, you can see the URL for our highlighter. It has the hash software application identifier. Martha's hash profile page is being defined. And then of course the organization being defined. And what this allows us to do is make these connections referenceable. So we're always describing and connecting to the exact same thing.
And this is sort of like, like that base metric, like entity SEO gets us to topics,
Yeah.
and topics are what AI and others are going to try to figure out if you're an authority on. And we'll talk a little bit
Mhm.
about, how our Entity Hub product like is allowing you to do that at scale. But this is like, you want to play an entity SEO, like this is sort of the foundation of it.
Yeah, and exactly. And so when we're looking at like connecting this, right, we have the highlighter having a creator of Schema App. We have Martha as a founder of Schema App. So we're all of a sudden making these relationships so clear, and like this crawlability, this understanding being much more semantic and much clearer across our scope. So this is when we're talking about like this advanced markup. That's what we're talking about.
And we've talked about entities here being like this kind of core piece. So entities are like
Hmm.
things, right? So like
Yeah.
and so one of the things that we do at scale, and now actually with Entity Hub allows you also to control and manage kind of what entities is this a concept of entity linking, right? So, bringing clarity on what that definition is. And you can imagine like the power that this comes when you can do this across a large site, right? And really understand what it is. And the way I like to describe it is, like these days, I don't know about you, but like when I'm prompting AI, I'm not just saying, like, find me, like a cardiologist or best cardiologist, right? It's like the very 1995 sort of type of search. Instead, I'm, having a conversation about how I want a top rated
Mhm.
cardiologist. I want it to be near Houston. I need to make sure they're taking new patients. By the way, I use Aetna Medicare Advantage. And so I want to make sure that they take my insurance. And so it's this very complex, conversation that I'm having. And you can imagine then as we connect all the things together, in this case, who the physician is, what procedures they provide, what hospital network they work in, where that's located, those connections, right? This advanced
Mhm.
schema markup is enabling an accurate answer to this more advanced search that's happening. So now that we've shared sort of, ad nauseum, like what what do we mean by advanced schema markup? What is the type of schema markup? Based on sort of how you're doing your schema markup, do you consider your schema markup of high quality? Now, while we get those answers, we're actually going to get into a little bit of like, why do we care? Like, let's get to the numbers. And so, Kevin, why don't you share a little
Mhm.
bit about the research that you and the team did with all the data from our customers?
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, Schema supports a variety of industries, a variety of customers. And so what we want to do is really take into view on like what has been the impact of like AI search on, frankly, like the industries that we're supporting. And when we did so, we were wanting to see like, well, let's get a comparison around like the pages that have schema markup that are covered with this advanced schema markup versus those pages that don't have schema markup. And the evidence is clear here. When we were looking at those pages in a 2024 versus 2025, we want to account for the advent of AI search and the impacts that we're seeing here. Again, the evidence is clear that in 2025, pages with advanced schema markup had higher impression gains than those pages without. We also saw protection against lost performance. So though both categories lost clicks, those pages with schema markup lost 50% fewer clicks. And so when we think about that volume of clicks, like what could that mean for conversions? What could that mean for, again, people getting onto the site and actually, converting on that page? And as a result, since we did see these higher impression gains, lost fewer percent clicks, of course, again, click decline occurred in both scenarios, but those pages with schema markup, because we lost so many fewer clicks, we actually had far less of a CTR decline. So again, bringing that qualified traffic into the site, like getting more clicks in comparison to those pages without schema markup, evidence is clear to me. Like it's a critical factor in driving those conversions.
Not only that, it's brand insurance, right? Like it's like if
Yeah.
we're sort of reducing sort of the loss, right? That's like a huge impact. Talk to us a
Mhm.
little bit about rich results.
Yeah, so rich results again, tried and tested tactic. It continues to support like improved CTR. So across these various industries, we were seeing improvements on CTR from the rich results versus the overall industry like average CTR, improving from somewhere between 42%, we can see that in like automotive, upwards of like 400%. So we're seeing that in hospitality. We have these like huge CTR increases when you're getting that decorated result. We know that AI search, again, has a significant real estate. And so getting eyes on those pages when, you might be suffering from like lower position, critical for standing out compared to your competitors. But it isn't just about the enhanced appearance. It's about winning the click when it matters most. So again, getting into those opportunities where you can convert. And one of the things that we're finding really fun is also looking at how the performance on like non-branded performance goes. And we are consistently seeing higher CTR on non-branded traffic as well. So again, it's rich results where available, still valuable, always worthwhile targeting.
Oh my gosh, I love this. And especially since like 95% of traffic is still coming from Google, right? This is still
Yeah.
like, I always joke, like in a time of zero clicks, like here's a way to increase, right? Like the number of clicks that you're going on. So, Kevin, tell us, we have a couple case studies in here that have like real numbers.
Hmm.
So, why don't you tell us a little bit about Brightview Senior Living and sort of what they
Yeah.
saw as a result of doing entity linking at scale?
Yeah. So again, we said like entity linking is one of these advanced tactics that we are able to apply for our customers, where we're starting to talk about those things that are defined on page and really bringing like clarity or disambiguation to what is being defined. And so Brightview Senior Living turned to us to support on like winning local search and future-proofing their SEO. After applying this advanced tactic, they saw a 25% increase in clicks and a 30% increase in impressions for non-branded queries that were containing these different things. So we're looking very precisely at the queries that would be targeted from here. And this was happening within months of strengthening their coverage here. So again, great success story that is just supporting further the value prop of the advanced schema markup.
Oh my God, love it. All right. And then tell us a little
Mhm.
bit about Syncrator, a bit of a different, vertical, kind of more on the
Mhm.
product side.
Yeah, and so we already mentioned sort of the impact of rich results on like non-branded, but of course, like rich results aren't the whole story. We want to help provide visibility for users where they are within the journey. And so within this same advanced tactic where we're bringing this like added clarity through this entity linking, they saw from InSincerator that their non-branded queries for their product pages saw a nearly 70% increase in clicks and again, about 116% increase in impressions. So getting far more visibility far more clicks by utilizing this advanced tactic.
Okay, so it's not just about control, it's about also still driving results and the results that are in today. And, I always ask the question, like, why? Like, why are we seeing this sort of connectedness, right? This like
Mhm.
entity optimization within sort of the context of the brand's graph, making such a big difference. And I really think it comes down to inferencing, right? So when we're trying to answer a question, and I was seeing Mr. Madhaven from Microsoft was presenting at Tech SEO Connect that I also spoke at in December. And he was talking about like it gives them confidence, right? Structured data gives them confidence that they're getting the right answer. And I think that's like what we're seeing here and why we're seeing this type of results. And so, part of this sort of entities are how search engines are understanding meaning, right? We're giving them
Mhm.
confidence that they can sort of give accurate results. And one of my favorite case studies is actually our own, right? So here at Schema App, we are the first adopters of things we build so that we can kind of measure, of course, and test and see sort of if our hypothesis come true. And so we actually started doing entity linking on Schema App. You can see this is our SEMrush results, and we're actually optimizing for the entity because we're super nerds, right? We're trying to kind of help people who are searching for entity SEO find us. And you can see that we actually saw, this is our AIO results. We saw some good performance, but then we actually turned it off by accident. This was just, like we were testing some other things, we turned it off, and look at the decline during the time that we turned it off. Okay, so then we turned it back on again. And then we started using our new product, which is called Entity Hub. So it's about optimizing entities. So it gives me control to like block and
Mhm.
curate entities. After we started doing that optimization, look, we have started achieving new heights. So this is again sort of great evidence. We saw a 19.72 increase in our AI overview visibility just by doing the optimization of our entity linking. Now, it's not just us. We also had a customer in the financial services area also implement schema markup. I saw the question here from Michelle saying, like, how long does it typically take to start seeing an impact from schema markup? Now, this is looking at a view of AIO, but in March was actually when we started implementing schema app at this financial services customer. And you can see immediately, like within a week or two, we started to see an increase in AIO. We saw that sort of, kind of taper off over a little time. Then we started optimizing entities using Entity Hub, and then we saw it grow again. So again, we might see fluctuations similar to what we saw, we see in sort of typical SEO,
Mhm.
but we are seeing sort of an impact on AIO visibility specifically when we do this connected schema markup using entity optimization with our Entity Hub product. Um, this comes back to that example I used before, right? We're about sort of doing this connected piece in order for
Mhm.
you to control how your brand's understood and how things are defined, right? So it all kind of comes back to this. And our hypothesis has always been that, it's because we're building these graphs and we are a semantic technology company. We know we speak knowledge graph left, right, and center, but there's a ton of research that shows, especially I love this first one from data.world, that large language models are more accurate when they use a knowledge graph as a data source. And so this is what we expect is happening. Kevin, you talked earlier about like efficiencies, right? The
Yeah.
structured data and when you define those relationships, you give that context is bringing that efficiencies. So we also see it sort of again building confidence and perhaps reducing hallucinations. Walk us through this case study, Kevin.
Yeah, so we work with Wells Fargo. We were finding that they were being affected by hallucinations. So again, Google within AI overviews, they are aggregating, synthesizing information that like you might not always have control over, right? And so what we wanted to do was to provide a use case where we would say, okay, well, let's look at some of those pages where you are finding hallucinations and let's add that markup and ensure that we are describing these pages accurately. And once we did so, we were finding that that hallucination was corrected. I think it was within like a week or two. So really rapidly helping Google better understand that like it was previously hallucinating, risking what again risking that those visitor or those like customer trust. But by applying the markup, we're giving it a source of truth, a source of information that it can then rely on and know that this is true, this is accurate, in order to help reduce those hallucinations. And so they were seeing increased visibility across traditional and AI-driven search as a result of this. But again, that hallucination being corrected, that to me was just like such a huge win.
Well, and I think that the other data point is like this page originally had schema markup, but it wasn't connected to the
Mm-hmm.
brand graph, right? Or like didn't have that context of that relationship.
Yeah.
And I do think that played a key role here. So this is another example of sort of brand control, right? Like how do we make sure your consumers are getting the answers you want them to see? And this is really what we do here at Schema App, right? So we are in the business of helping you scale schema markup across your site. Our schema app highlighter is that tool that we use that allows us to build robust schema markup with entity linking, with all those beautiful technical ad IDs across any type, right? So we have the entire schema.org vocabulary, all the properties. And this is really, it's built so that it will be dynamic and update as your content changes. The other piece that I've mentioned before is around like how do we help you do entity linking, this more advanced schema markup strategy, sort of at scale. And so this is why we introduced this past summer our entity hub solution, which doesn't just allow you to identify, it also allows you to audit, optimize, and analyze your entities. And this is so important because again, if we're in the world of being sort of an authority, right, in search and in AI, you want to know what you're actually talking about, right? Like, do we actually have the content, that's talking about knowledge graphs? Like, I'm a knowledge graph company, or, talking about entities, even though an entity is an entity, right? Like, you need to make sure that your content is illustrating that you're an authority. And so, what I love, something that really differs from who we are at Schema App is like, we basically build that data layer, right? And so, why not tell you like what your data layer is telling AI and Google about what you know about, what your content's about, what your brand's about? And so, that's really what entity linking, our entity reports and manager. And what I'm really excited about is like entities, while they're kind of nerdy, if you are sort of a leader in your organization, you're like, my executives are not going to know what an entity is. Well, guess what? They know what topics are, right? And entities are really what roll up to topics. And so when you want to answer the question of which topics are driving results for our business, or what topics do we need to invest in order to increase our brand authority, good news, right? You can now take your data of entities, roll them up to topics, and actually be able to do this easily. How? By using Schema App's new Entity Hub topic management. So we're super, super excited to share that we now have topic management within Schema App that will allow you to not only manage your entities, but start reporting on topics. And the intent here is that you can then use this knowledge to really guide your content teams on where you need to invest to get the biggest return, to be that authority, right? So this is all about that brand management, right? Making sure your brand is understood for the things that you want to be known for. Why? So you can drive business results. All right. I'm a little excited about it. Can you tell? It's really, really excited. It's the first of its kind and it's managing the data, right? So, like, we're really trying to get it not just report, right? A lot of these AI visibility things are just reporting. We're helping you actually change that within the data. So, we're super excited about it.
Mhm.
If you're with us and you're a customer, ask your CSM about it. And you'll see more about us writing about it through our blog as we sort of bring it to market. All right, we have some other
Mhm.
news with regards to server side. So why don't you tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about integrations, Kevin?
Absolutely. So this is a really exciting time. So there's a lot of conversation around like server-side rendering, client-side rendering. And so the great news here is that with Schema App, we integrate with all websites and CMSs. We have a variety of CMS-specific integrations. We are often seeing like easy scalability by deploying markup through like JavaScript, through tag managers. But we're also investing further in some of our server-side rendering options. So we're developing CDN-specific integrations, including for Akamai, for Cloudflare, in order to give our customers control over how they're being seen. Again, really helping support that like brand authority, brand control, and narrative. So again, we're really excited to be expanding upon the like already existing server-side rendering options that we have, but there might still be some questions as to, well, which one is best for my site? So when we're looking towards like making that decision around server-side deployment versus JavaScript deployment, with server-side, You're going to have a bit more requirement from effort from your DevOps team because they will have to support you in installing this. The schema markup, however, is going to be accessible with no JavaScript execution. And we know that, like, well, with some of the large language models, they may not all render the JavaScript. And so the server-side deployment option will make it, like, ensure that there is visibility for all large language models. One of the other benefits here for server-side rendering is that it's produced without browser IP address involved. So again, you can mitigate some of those concerns around like PII and also just whatever other information might get collected through JavaScript.
All right. Love this, right? We're going to keep innovating and releasing things that help our customers not just do schema markup, but lead and be ready, right? Really sort of,
Mm.
be skating to where the puck is going, right? Not to just where it is for my fun hockey analogy. All right. One last piece I just want to talk about is like with us talking about innovation and helping our clients stay ahead, we're super excited to make sure that the data that we produce is ready to talk to the agentic web. And so we already have Model Context Protocol, an MCP server that has a semantic vector database right behind it. We've been using it internally. It's rocking. It's super, super awesome. And this is really great because it can then allow you to integrate with internal AI initiatives, OpenAI, Anthropic, other sort of integration elements. It's available today, for our clients to use and for them to integrate. We also have been starting to set up NL Web within Schema App. So this is Microsoft's open agentic solution. And again, our idea here is how do we start integrating it into the platform so people can experience perhaps what an agent might see because NL Web uses your structured data and maybe identify opportunities for new content or areas of coverage that you might want to make sure is answered before the agentic web takes off in your industry. So again, if you work with us, ask your CSM about it. We are actively testing it with some of our clients already. Schema App, of course, is using it. You can go to our website and experience NL Web also on our search bar. So we are
Mhm.
not just talking about the agentic web, we are making it happen. All right. I'm going to just do one last wrap up before I go to questions. If you want to learn more or kind of get access to more of this data, my amazing marketing team has put together the Impact of Schema Markup report. So you can go ahead and scan that or download that today. And then if you want to connect with Kevin and I, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. Kevin, this has been super fun. Are we ready for a couple questions?
Absolutely, always.
Okay. So, one of my favorite ones here is how do you convince leadership to invest in structured data when the value may not be immediate? Well, let's just talk about value. Like we see results like within that first 30 days, right? So it's a pretty quick turnaround. Um, though it is a data layer, right? So it's something that you have to, cultivate and manage, as well as you're seeing sort of the content is a big driver here. The way I've been approaching it with leaders is twofold. One is how do we make sure you're optimizing sort of the traffic you're getting today, right? The
Mhm.
existing kind of SEO play. We know we get higher click through rate. Kevin shared all those great results from Rich Results. We know it's driving non branded and branded queries. And so there's some great return on investment you can get that's very, very measurable today from sort of old school search, right? SEO. And then here's the other thing. Let's get ahead of the risk management of how AI is interpreting your brand. And I think like when I talk to most executives, they want to make sure they're two steps ahead. This is data that you control, that there's strong evidence that they're using in order to understand your brand. And so I love that you get both, right? You get results today and you're making sure you're two steps ahead. And you get to partner with someone like us who's innovative, who's going to make sure you're leading in the agentic web. So that's how we do it. If you need help talking to your executives, please reach out to us. I'm happy to jump on the phone with them. All right, we had one question that I want to get to. It was from John. It was earlier in the conversation, and it's, how do you basically make sure that you're thinking about product schema to make sure you're talking about all the kind of variant level attributes?
Mhm.
So, Kevin, this is one for you as sort of an expert. How do
Yeah.
you make sure all those variants are explained and understood?
Well, good news, Google has documentation on exactly this scenario. So where we can look towards like product groups that have variants, we can define those like separately. And I love the call out around like, BTU output, dimensions. And we can start looking at like property specifications to really call those things out, wherein maybe those aren't associated schema properties. So GTIN, SKU, those will be associated schema properties. But we can go further to define like some of these property values. And I love this question because when we're thinking about those like more semantic style queries that we're starting to see, we want to make sure we're targeting that information accurately. So I would say start with the like Google documentation around product variants, but then also start thinking around how you can bring those property specifications in from the product markup itself.
Makes me think about how I'm looking for a new vanity for my bathroom, and I have very specifics on color and size that I'm looking for that would help me sort of do that shopping. We're out of
Mhm.
time. We like to finish on time. Thank you very much for coming today. Thank you, Kevin, for your great
Thank you.
insights. And please reach out to us if we can help you manage your brand for AI.